unfinished tomb, perhaps intended for Joseph of Arimathea's wife.
Covering the tomb that you can see in front of you, except that this right-hand side had collapsed, we think, due to earthquake damage, and at that time they strengthened it with these stone blocks. Now, when you go into the tomb, don't think it's a natural cave that's been adapted as a tomb. It's not. It's been cut out of the rock, just as described in the Bible. And it's a large and impressive tomb, speaking of it being the tomb of a rich man like Joseph of Arimathea. A poor person couldn't afford a tomb of this kind. Now, when it was in use as a tomb, the entrance was much lower than you see it at the moment. We think it was only about 1 metre high. So you'd have to bend down to look into it or to go into it. And as you probably know, it was sealed by a large rolling stone, wasn't it? Now, we've never found that original stone, but it would have looked a little like that one behind you. Can you see that one there? That one's dated back to that period, so it gives you some idea of what it looked like.
There's no smell or sense of decay. If this had been Joseph of Arimathea's unfinished family tomb, it would almost certainly have looked like this. Jesus rose from the dead in 3 days, and his body did not decay. That the tomb was prepared in a hurry. Here are the chisel marks to show where the rock was hollowed out. But something is far more interesting. Someone has extended the loculus. The burial chamber has been extended to make a body several inches taller than the person it was intended for. We know that if this is the tomb used to bury Jesus, the stonemason was in a hurry because all preparations had to be completed by the Sabbath. The tomb was originally designed for someone 5 feet 8 inches tall, quite tall in ancient times. The loculus has been hastily lengthened, and the space is now something over 6 feet. It is believed that Jesus was around the same height as our cameraman, 5 feet 11 inches tall. Now we come to investigate the area outside the tomb. There is a large cistern which confirms that it was almost certainly a garden in Jesus' time. The dry climate meant saving water for irrigation in underground containers in the rock. This cistern holds 250,000 gallons of water, the 3rd largest in Jerusalem, and it must have been used to irrigate a large and luxuriant garden.
If I could remind you of a verse in John's Gospel, do you remember? It says in John's Gospel that at the place where Jesus was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Now, we've seen the possible site of the crucifixion at that place called Skull Hill. Here we are in a beautiful garden, but what's the evidence to say there was a garden here at the time of Jesus? If you look at this photograph, I think this shows you part of the evidence that tells us there was a garden here at that time. This is a very large water system. As you know, they dug them all over Israel in the past, didn't they, to store the rainwater in the winter so they had plenty of water for the dry season. This one, the head of it, is just over there and it goes deep underground. It's the 3rd largest water cistern in Jerusalem, and it takes about 1 million litres of water, and it's been dated back to pre-Christian times, so it's over 2,000 years old. So it was certainly here at the time of Jesus. Now, the discovery of this cistern and also an ancient wine press that's been found here tell us this was a garden at that time, not the sort of garden that you're looking at now, but we believe it was a cultivated area, and we think it was probably a vineyard for growing grapes with lots of water in this to water those grapes. Now, because it's so extensive, it also suggests that it's a garden of a rich man like Joseph of Arimathea. We know he was wealthy, don't we? The Bible tells us. And if you remember, he and Nicodemus, they'd both become secret followers of Jesus, hadn't they? But in the end, they had the courage to come out in the open, and they went to Pilate, the Roman governor, asked for his body, and the Bible says they buried him in Joseph's own new tomb. So all the three things described in John's Gospel are found here on this site. So you can see how well it does fit the biblical account.
The cistern and the winepress are circumstantial evidence, but the most telling piece of evidence is just outside the tomb. St. Matthew tells us that after Jesus' body was prepared for burial and the disciples had sent their farewells, the tomb was closed by rolling a huge circular stone across the entrance and sealing it in place. The heavy stone and seal were fitted on the orders of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. The team visited the Jewish National and University Library in Israel to confirm the date of these ancient maps. Dated 1584, 300 years before the Garden Tomb was discovered. How did the printmaker know of these locations? Both these sites were covered in rubble and not fully excavated until the 19th century. The city boundaries have changed and the walls have been rebuilt. But if we remove this section, we find Golgotha, both on a corner and outside the city walls, exactly where it should be according to the Gospels. We know from St. Matthew's Gospel that the crucifixion site was at a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of the skull, and we have seen this in the rock formation. Only yards from here, there is a tomb cut from the rock, which St. Matthew describes thus: after wrapping Jesus in a clean linen cloth, Joseph of Arimathea laid him in his own new tomb, which he had hewn from the rock.
But the Bible also says there was a violent earthquake. And interestingly enough, there is a large earthquake crack here in the rock face. Can you see that? Which could, of course, be evidence of that very earthquake.
The tomb is large enough to accommodate not only Peter and John, but also the two angels Mary Magdalene saw in the tomb, in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. We know from the graffiti inside the tomb that it was a place of worship only decades after the resurrection. Outside the tomb is evidence of a stone track and a piece of very old metal driven high up into the rock, which we think was a spike to prevent anyone breaking into the tomb and rolling the 9-ton stone away.
Jesus said, "Go into all the world and preach the good news to all creation.